My name is Elena Miller. I'm 22 years old, and as I tell you these words, my hands are still shaking because I know that what I'm about to say will seem absurd to you, maybe even impossible. Yet I know it's true because I lived it firsthand in my wounded body and my shaken heart. On July 30th, 2025, I died for 18 minutes. Not a momentary collapse, not a simple fainting spell, but clinical death. My heart stopped. My brain showed no more signs of activity. Yet, in that absolute silence, in that darkness that should have swallowed me forever, I saw and heard things that changed every fragment of my existence. But let me go in order, because my life before that moment was the normal life of a normal girl, and perhaps that is why what happened to me shook me even more. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, a city that lives under the scorching sun almost all year round. Studying mechanical engineering at Arizona State University was the dream I had set for myself since I was a little girl, and I was pursuing it with stubbornness and hard work. I was never the type to spend my days in church. I believed in God, of course, but superficially, without ever truly putting Him at the center. I lived for university projects, internships, grades, and sleepless nights spent calculating formulas and programming software. I wanted a secure future, a well-paying job, and the chance to tell myself that I had made it. I was a rational, logical girl with little patience for mysteries or things that couldn't be explained with data. That July morning started like many others. The heat was already oppressive at 7, and as I got into my old car, with the air conditioning barely blowing out a warm breeze, I felt strangely satisfied. I had just passed a difficult exam, and my boss at the construction site where I was interning had hinted that there would be a place for me after graduation. I quickly ate an energy bar, drank another can of coffee, and repeated to myself that maybe, finally, I was starting to build something concrete in my life. The radio was playing an environmental engineering podcast, and I smiled to myself, imagining a future of projects, offices, and business trips. I didn't think of anything else. There was no room for spiritual questions. There was no time to stop and wonder who I really was or what I was looking for. I was running like everyone else, convinced that the finish line was ahead, and that all it took was hard work to reach it. I don't remember the exact moment of the impact, yet I know I was on Interstate 10, the traffic unusually clear for a Tuesday morning. A feeling of calm had enveloped me, almost as if the world had decided to smile at me for a moment. Then, nothing. They told me later that a truck driver, having fallen asleep at the wheel, had crossed 3 lanes uncontrollably. I had no escape. My small car was crushed like a can. The paramedics said that extracting me from that tangle of metal was a miracle. I don't remember anything about that rescue, neither the sirens nor the pain. I only remember a suspended instant, a heartbeat that was missing, a breath that was no more, and then a frightening quiet. In the real world, in that ambulance speeding toward the hospital, my heart stopped twice. But I was no longer there. I was no longer Elena, the girl worried about her grades, the young intern with career dreams. In that absolute void, I began to glimpse something that cannot be explained by any law of physics. Yet the first thought I had, the very moment I realized I was no longer in my body, was absurd. A question I never thought I would ask myself. Is this really the moment? Am I ready to die? That question echoed inside me, while everything around seemed suspended, as if time itself had stopped along with my heart. There was no fear, at least not as we understand it. It was something different, a sudden awareness, as if all the certainties of my life, formulas, calculations, goals, had dissolved in an instant. That was the beginning. I didn't know yet that I was about to experience something that would shatter every belief, that would tear me from the logic with which I had built my existence and catapult me into a realm that does not belong to this world. But my death, on that July 29th, was only the first step toward the most shocking truth of my life. I couldn't tell you how much time passed since my heart stopped. If you ask me to measure it, to translate it into minutes or seconds, I can't. In that absence of breath and heartbeat, time no longer existed. There was only a silent void, and I suspended in a place that resembled nothing I had ever seen on earth. At first I thought it was a dream, one of those strange journeys we sometimes make when we are balanced between sleep and wakefulness. But I immediately understood that it wasn't, because everything was too real, too intense, too alive to be a fantasy. In front of me, there was not the darkness I had imagined associated with death. There was not that absolute darkness we fear when we think of the end. There was light, a light that had no origin, no sun, no lamp, yet it was everywhere. It enveloped me like a warm cloak. It penetrated inside me like a new breath. It was not a blinding glare, but a luminosity that seemed to pulsate, as if it were alive, as if it had a heart that beat in unison with what remained of my spirit. I remember reaching out instinctively, almost wanting to touch that atmosphere that breathed, and I realized that it wasn't simple light, it was presence. A presence that spoke without words, that transmitted love without the need for gestures, that filled the voids I didn't know I had. The more I tried to describe it with my rational mind, the more it eluded me. It was like trying to enclose the infinite in a mathematical formula. Impossible. Then something happened that took my breath away, although I wasn't breathing. From that light that seemed to vibrate all around, I felt a sense of movement emerge. It was as if someone was approaching, not with steps, but with a flow that was both gentle and powerful. First I perceived it, as you perceive the presence of someone behind you, even without turning around. Then I saw him, a man, not just any man. He didn't resemble the images I had seen in paintings or in the icons hanging in some church. He didn't have the stereotypical face of the depictions that as a child had left me indifferent. Yet, as soon as my eyes met his, I knew. I knew who he was. No introductions were needed. There were no doubts. It was Jesus. His eyes were the first thing that struck me. Deep beyond any abyss, infinite like an ocean you cannot measure. In them there was wisdom, there was sweetness, but above all there was a love that pierced me like a blade of light, a love that I had never known, that I had never dared to imagine. When he spoke, it was not with a voice I heard through my ears. It was a sound that vibrated directly inside me, in my heart, in my bones, in my spirit. He said my name, Elena. And hearing him say it was like listening to the most beautiful melody ever composed. In that single instant, I understood that I had never been a number. I had never been invisible. I had never been forgotten. God knew my name. He told me I had been brought there for a purpose, that it was not a coincidence or an accident. There are things you must see, things you must tell, because time is short and humanity does not understand it. His words were not just words. They were life. Every syllable carried with it strength and urgency, and together a tenderness that made me melt. I would have wanted to ask 1,000 things. Why me? Why now? Why, after 22 years of doubts and indifference? But inside me, I understood that this was not the time to ask. It was the time to listen, to receive. I felt an urgency that shook me to my soul. Something big was happening, and time was not infinite. When he touched my shoulder, not a physical hand, but a contact more real than any skin, I felt as if all the fears I had always carried melted away. I was no longer alone. I had never been. I just hadn't realized it. Hadn't. He looked at me as no one had ever looked at me. Without veils, without defenses, without conditions. I, with all my mistakes, with all my superficiality, was loved, truly loved. And it was then that I saw his expression change. His gaze became more serious, more intense. The world is entering its last season of grace, he told me. September 2025 is a threshold, the last call before everything changes. You will see what must be shown, and you must say it, because time does not wait. Those words came down on me like a raging river. I felt the weight of responsibility, but also the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. In that moment, as the light around me began to vibrate and transform, I understood that I was about to embark on a journey that would change not only me, but every person I would have the courage to tell. It was the beginning of the vision. I couldn't tell you how it happened. One moment I was immersed in that light that breathed with me, wrapped in the presence of Jesus, and the next, everything around us opened like a curtain slowly rising, revealing what had always been there, hidden behind the surface of the world. It was as if I had been given new eyes, not just physical eyes, but eyes capable of seeing inside, beyond, through. And what I saw hit me with the force of lightning. We were above a city. I immediately recognized the familiar shapes: streets, buildings, cars rushing by, people hurrying to their daily commitments. It all looked normal, yet it wasn't. Because I wasn't just seeing the external things, I was also seeing what was behind and within. The walls of houses, the glass of offices, even the facades of skyscrapers were transparent. I could observe people as if every barrier had dissolved, and even more shockingly, I could look into their hearts. Every man and woman had a kind of inner flame. Some shone dimly, like almost extinguished coals. Others were completely smothered by a gray blanket that looked like smoke. Very few burned brightly, like lighthouses in the fog. And next to these people, I saw presences. They weren't fantasies. They weren't metaphors. They were real beings. Some carried a serene light with them. They emanated a peace that reminded me of the same peace I had felt from Jesus. Others, however, were dark, deformed, unsettling. They moved like slimy shadows, creeping into homes, into thoughts, into people's daily actions. I understood that I was witnessing a battle, a silent war that was not fought with weapons, but with influences, lies, truth, and inner choices. Jesus touched my shoulder, and his voice resonated within me. Look, Elena, this is what happens every day. While most people believe that life is only work, money, and pleasure. But the reality is much deeper. Souls are being fought over, moment by moment. Then I saw precise scenes, almost as if I were allowed to enter people's lives. In an office, a man was bent over his computer, his face tense with fatigue. A dark shadow whispered to him, "You'll never make it. You're a failure. You're worthless." And while he believed they were just his own thoughts, I saw him bend, accept that poison, letting the fire inside him go out a little more. But next to him, almost overlapping, a luminous being tried to speak to him. "Hold on, you're not alone. There's still hope." It only took a hint of attention to perceive it, yet the man didn't listen. In another house, I saw a mother clutching bills in her hands, tears streaking her face. Two forces surrounded her, a dark one that pushed her to despair, to believe that God had forgotten her, and one of light that instilled courage in her, reminding her that she was not alone. She hesitated. She wavered between the two voices, and I held my breath, as if her destiny depended on that fragile instant of decision. Everywhere I looked, the scene was repeated. Young people chasing success on social media, while demons laughed, feeding on their vanity. Men and women obsessed with money and power, while their inner flame darkened. Families divided by quarrels that arose from words whispered into their souls by the darkness. But I also saw the opposite. Elderly people who prayed in silence, and their prayer was like a luminous barrier that protected their loved ones. Children who, with their innocence, repelled entire armies of shadows. Simple people who performed small acts of love and, with that gesture, put to flight evil spirits who thought they had already won. The contrast was violent, and my heart broke with every scene. I couldn't remain indifferent. I couldn't look without feeling an inner pain that tore at me. Jesus beside me let me observe, but his gaze was filled with infinite sadness. "Many," he said with a voice that trembled with compassion, live as if this world is all that matters. They run toward goals that will vanish. They chase illusions that will dissolve like dust, while they neglect the eternal treasures that I am preparing for them. It is the great blindness of these times. I felt tears streaming down my face, because suddenly I realized that I was that too. I, with my studies, my career dreams, my days spent calculating numbers and building projects, I had been blind, just like them. I had never considered that, while I was running, a battle for my very soul was being fought around me. It was then that Jesus showed me something even more shocking. The sky above the city changed its appearance. It appeared like a huge map, and in the center a message shone that I will never forget: September 2025. From that message, waves of light and shadows of darkness emanated, spreading like storms, affecting every heart, every family, every nation. This is a turning point month, he said, a threshold, a point of no return. From here, different paths open up, and the choices that people will make in this time will determine not only their individual future, but the entire course of humanity. I felt small, fragile, unable to bear the weight of such a vision. But Jesus was not showing me all this to crush me. He was entrusting it to me so that I would understand the urgency, so that I would be a witness. I then understood that this invisible battle was not a fable or a symbol. It was real. It was happening now, and September 2025 was the decisive testing ground. And while the world continued to run unaware, I was observing the greatest war ever fought, a silent war that will decide the fate of billions of souls. The scene in front of me suddenly changed. I was no longer above the city with its transparent buildings and contested souls, but suspended in an undefined, almost cosmic place. Before me lay a line, a kind of horizon that had nothing earthly about it. It was as if I were looking at the very fabric of time, a river that flowed not in water, but in light. And from that river, two great roads opened, two opposite, diverging directions. Jesus was at my side, and his face was serious. He did not speak yet, as if he was letting me absorb with my own eyes what I was about to understand. I stared at those two roads, and already within me I felt the truth. They were two possible futures. Not dreams, not fantasies, but real paths that depended on the choices that humanity would make at that crucial moment. The first road shone with an intense light. It was not the dazzling light that blinds, but a gentle, welcoming brightness, capable of warming the soul. Along that path, I saw families reuniting, hugs that healed old wounds, communities supporting each other like never before. In some places, churches were full, not out of obligation or tradition, but out of an authentic thirst. Men and women of every age and language gathered not for external religiosity, but because they had discovered a living, close, present God. I saw fathers kneeling next to their children, mothers raising their hands in prayer, young people who stopped chasing only success and vanity to offer their time to those in need. Along that path of light, a new air was breathed, as if the world had finally understood that heaven is not an illusion, but our true home. I was overwhelmed by the beauty of that future. It seemed impossible that humanity could become like that, and yet there, in front of me, it was already a reality. Then I turned my gaze to the other road, and my heart ached. That path was immersed in an unsettling darkness, not total, but creeping, like black fog that insinuated itself into every crack. Here, families were divided. Men walked alone with empty eyes. Cities were illuminated by artificial lights, but without human warmth. I saw wars not only of weapons, but of words, of cultures, of ideologies that shattered the deepest bonds. People lived immersed in haste, in greed, in indifference, and their faces were lifeless, marked by a sadness that found no outlet. I was shaken because I recognized on that road many things already present in the reality we know. the loneliness that devours, even in the midst of crowds, the verbal violence that wears down relationships, the idolatry of technology that isolates rather than unites. But here, in this vision, everything was taken to the extreme. A world where God had been definitively silenced, and with him, all hope. At that moment, Jesus spoke, and his words pierced me. Elena, what you see are the two paths that humanity has before it. They are not illusions. Both exist. Both are possible. I offer the path of light, of awakening, of reconciliation, but man, with his freedom, can also choose the other, the path of blindness and darkness. September 2025 is a crossroads. The decisions made now, in this time, will orient the future not only of individuals, but of entire nations. Wedge, those words weighed on me like a boulder. I, who had always thought of life as a sum of individual choices, discovered that every human act contributes to the collective destiny. Every heart open or closed to God does not only influence itself, but the entire body of humanity. As I listened, I saw the timeline vibrate. It was not fixed, it was not rigid, it moved, it changed as if it were alive. Every time someone chose good, a fragment of darkness dissolved. Every time someone gave in to selfishness, the shadow extended. And I understood that the future is not an immobile block, but an organism that grows and transforms according to the seeds planted today. My heart was filled with questions. How could I, such a small and fragile girl, talk about such a great destiny? Who would believe me? Yet Jesus did not let me fall into panic. He placed his invisible hand on my heart again, and I felt that he was transmitting to me not only the responsibility, but also the certainty that I would not be alone. I looked at the two roads again, one of light, one of darkness. It seemed to me that the whole world was there in front, like a people on a journey, hesitating at the crossroads. Some turned their gaze toward the light as if they already felt the call. Others, however, ran headlong into the darkness, as if attracted by a void that was devouring them. And within me, I understood with a clarity I had never had before. Humanity is truly free. God calls, invites, opens the way, but he does not force anyone. Heaven is not for the forced. It is for the beloved who choose to love. Jesus sighed, and in his gaze I saw at the same time an immense hope and a pain that cannot be described. The future is not written blindly, he told me. It is written by the choices of hearts. Everyone writes a line, a gesture, a yes or a no, and together these lines become the history of a people, the history of the world. I felt smaller than ever before, yet I understood that every life counts, mine, yours, anyone's, because every heart is a brick that builds or destroys the future of humanity. When the vision of the crossroads began to dissolve, I thought it was over, that I had already seen enough to be shaken to my core. But it wasn't. Jesus looked at me with those eyes that contained both eternity and tears, and he said to me, "Now I will show you what comes immediately after, a time that will not last long, but that will mark the difference between the life and death of many souls. It is the harvest season, or all of a sudden I found myself in a vast field, so large that I couldn't see its borders. It was not a normal field. It did not belong to any earthly landscape. The ground shimmered with a golden light, and the ears of wheat swayed not in the wind, but to a rhythm that seemed to come from the very heart of heaven. Each of them was alive, and I soon understood that they were not ears of wheat, but souls. Each represented a life, a person, and together they formed that immense harvest waiting to be gathered. Jesus bent down and gathered an ear of wheat that shone brightly in his hands. He showed it to me, and I saw in a flash the life of a woman, her days of suffering, her nights of prayer, her trust that was never broken despite the trials. Then he took another ear, dull and bent over itself, And this time I saw a man who had closed his heart, who lived only for himself, chasing shadows that had made him emptier and emptier. In that moment, I understood. The harvest was not about the grain of the earth, but the eternal grain of souls. The time of the harvest has begun, Jesus said, with a voice that was not threatening, but filled with a solemnity that made me tremble. The prayers of my children have prepared this moment. The heavens are open. My grace descends with power, but the season will be short. As in earthly fields, there is a time to sow and a time to reap. This, Elena, is the time of the harvest. As he spoke, I saw men and women appear in every corner of the field. Some were dressed as farmers, with sickles of light in their hands. Others were simple, with bare hands, but they still gathered the luminous ears and placed them in large golden baskets. I understood that these were the workers of the harvest, those who had answered God's call, evangelists, preachers, but also mothers who taught their children, young people who prayed for their friends, elderly people who interceded in silence. Each, in their own way, was collaborating in the gathering of souls. But I also saw the opposite, ears of wheat that fell to the ground, never gathered, because there were not enough hands to receive them. Some rotted under a sky that was darkening. Tears came to my eyes because I perceived that every lost ear was a soul that chose to refuse grace, and often only because no one had reached out to gather it. Many have been praying for years for a revival, Jesus continued, and now the answer is here. But the revival requires workers. It requires available hearts, not perfect ones. Too many believe they are inadequate, too fragile, too sinful to serve me, but they do not understand that it is precisely their availability, not their perfection, that makes the harvest abundant. I felt those words penetrate me like a personal call. I myself, until that moment, had always felt too small, too rational, too far from the things of God. Yet Jesus was showing me that it is not the greatness of the one who reaps that matters, but obedience to his invitation. Then the vision expanded again. I saw the whole world as a mosaic of fields, each with its own season. In some nations, the ears of wheat shone and fell copiously into the baskets, a sign that many were opening their hearts to God. In others, the shadows stretched, and the workers were few, too few. I felt crushed by the urgency. Every day, every choice, every word could decide whether an ear of wheat was gathered or lost. I remember shouting inside myself as if I couldn't hold back the question, "Lord, what can I do? I who am nobody, I who have never known how to speak of you?" And he looked at me with that sweetness that embraces everything and replied, "It is not your ability, but my spirit that gathers. You will be a voice, a witness, a seed. I will make the fruit grow and mature. But you, like many others, must have the courage to say yes, because every yes is one more arm that gathers. Every yes is one more soul saved." At that moment, I saw young people witnessing without shame in schools, families opening their homes to pray together, sick people offering their suffering as powerful intercession. And I also saw the fruits, people who lit up with light, transformed lives, entire communities that changed face. It was like watching a forest burn and suddenly seeing it covered again with green and life. But next to this beauty, I also saw a clock that ticked away the time. The hands ran fast and made me understand that the season would not last forever. The grace of this time is unique, Jesus said. It is a threshold, an open door. But when the door closes, what has not been gathered will remain outside. Or my heart squeezed as if in a vice. I could no longer remain neutral. I could no longer postpone it. I had seen with my own eyes that the harvest was real, and that the responsibility was not for a chosen few, but for everyone. Everyone, with their hands, with their voice, with their love, was called to participate. and I understood that I myself, upon returning to Earth, would be one of those hands. No longer a distracted student, no longer a daughter who tried to please the world. I, Elena, would become a worker of the harvest. When Jesus led me beyond that river of light, the space around me seemed to open like a great curtain. There were no longer the limits of a corridor, nor the boundaries of a room, but a vastness that breathed as if it were alive. Before my eyes, two scenarios appeared that seemed to pulse side by side, like two universes that coexisted and that I could have touched simply by reaching out my hand. I felt that they were not just visions, but real possibilities, destinies that awaited all of humanity. To my left, a bleak, almost suffocating scene opened up. The sky was a metallic gray. The clouds overlapped with unnatural speed, as if the wind had gone mad. The cities I saw were on fire, but not from a natural blaze. They had been devoured by riots, civil wars, explosions of anger. Men and women ran in the streets not to help each other, but to destroy each other. I saw looted shops, families hiding in basements, children crying with no one to comfort them. The air was filled with fear and betrayal. An agonizing silence preceded moments of chaos. I saw squares turn into battlefields, churches closed or desecrated, and in the center of this chaos, a dark, invisible, yet perceptible power. It was not a face, it was not a man, but a force that held the hearts of millions in its grip. It was the deception I had already glimpsed in other visions, now fully revealed. A power that promised peace and security, but that in reality reduced people to chains. People, tired of suffering, accepted those chains as if they were a gift. I felt a searing pain inside me because it was clear that this future was the fruit of the choices of a humanity that had preferred itself to God, that had put technology, money, and pride in the place of the Creator. Then Jesus invited me to look to my right, and there, like a sunrise that is born behind a mountain, I saw another world. It was not without trials. It was not an earthly paradise, but it was a world in which love and faith shone stronger than the darkness. Families prayed together. Churches were alive, not just with rituals, but with hearts on fire. I saw young people on their knees in the squares, businessmen laying their own interests before the altar, governments that, despite 1,000 difficulties, sought justice instead of profit. Nature itself seemed to sing a new praise. The fields were lush, the seas calm. The wind was not a threat, but a caress. And the greatest sign was the light that descended from above, a light that did not come from the sun, but from the presence of God Himself, who dwelt among men. It was not a mystical dream. It was a concrete future, made of decisions made day by millions of people who had chosen to say yes to Christ. In that vision, prayer was no longer relegated to the weak, but became the breath of humanity. Communities supported each other. The poor were no longer invisible, and even the diseases that had made the world tremble seemed to lose strength in the face of faith and solidarity. Jesus looked at me, and in His eyes I read a love that burned without consuming. He said to me with a firm voice, but one filled with mercy, "These two futures are not far off. They do not belong to remote generations. They are before you now. The heart of man is the field in which the battle is fought. Every prayer, every act of faith, every renunciation of sin opens the door to the future of light. Every compromise with pride, every indifference, every choice of selfishness, instead, opens the abyss of darkness." Those words pierced me. I realized that He was not speaking to an indistinct mass, but to me, to each of us. I could no longer think that history was decided by the great powerful, by economies, or by wars. History was decided deep down by the invisible choices of individuals, by a mother who forgives, by a young man who chooses purity, by a worker who resists corruption. Every gesture, small or large, weighed on the scales of history. Looking once more at the two visions, my heart trembled. because I knew that humanity was already at a crossroads and that there was not much time left. I felt that the world was suspended on a threshold, like a traveler who must choose whether to cross the door of life or that of destruction. And yet, in that trembling, a deep hope also lit up. The future of light was not an illusion. It was not a utopia. It was real, tangible, already ready to open. If only we had the courage to kneel and call upon God with a sincere heart. At that instant, Jesus placed his hand on my chest, right where my heart was beating like a mad drum. I felt his peace pour into me, like an oil that soothed every wound. And I understood that I hadn't been brought there out of curiosity or for a show, but to be a witness. I was supposed to tell what I had seen, so that others would choose the path of light before it was too late. When the voice of Jesus faded and I remained suspended in that place that belonged neither to earth nor to heaven, I felt that something was changing around me. It wasn't a visible change, but a subtle transformation, like the beating of a heart that suddenly quickens for no apparent reason. The spiritual air that I was breathing, if I can call it that, began to vibrate with a new awareness, almost as if eternity itself had drawn closer to my gaze. I realized that there, in the mystery that enveloped my soul, time didn't flow as it does on earth. There were no seconds or hours, only the urgency of revelation that was pressing to be heard. Then I found myself transported into a kind of vision that I can't explain whether it was a dream, a memory, or a real journey in the spirit. I saw the world from above, as if I were observing the entire earth suspended in space. I recognized it immediately, the continents, the oceans, the clouds that ran like flocks driven by the wind. But it wasn't the same earth you see from satellite photos. There was a different aura, a tremor that ran through it. The entire planet seemed like a living creature that was groaning, breathing with difficulty as if in anticipation of imminent pain. In that image, the earth was not just geography, but a suffering body. I saw illuminated areas, cities that shone as if they were lit by millions of light bulbs, but suddenly the lights went out one after another, leaving entire nations in darkness. Then I understood that it wasn't just an electrical blackout, it was a spiritual sign. The societies that boasted of their strength and progress would know a darkness that no technology could dissipate. Then the vision shifted to specific places. I saw a large capital city with glass and steel buildings that towered like spires of pride. Suddenly, those towers began to tremble, not from an earthquake, but from a shock that started from the very heart of the city. It was the collapse of trust, the collapse of what people had built on money, illusion, and arrogance. I saw disoriented crowds, men and women running in the streets, unable to understand where to find refuge. There was no war, no visible enemy, yet fear was everywhere. It was as if God had taken away their support, leaving them alone to face the fragility of their existence. In the midst of that confusion, I noticed small houses illuminated by a different light, warm, peaceful. They were not powered by electricity, but by prayer. I saw families kneeling, men holding rosaries in their worn fingers, women whispering the name of Jesus, children raising their hands to the sky with a disarming simplicity. Those houses remained still, intact, even joyful in the midst of the general fear. The voice of Jesus whispered inside me, "Behold my own, those who have chosen to trust, those who have not let the oil in their lamp go out. The world will fall, but they will stand." The vision changed again, and I saw a calendar. The pages turned by themselves as if an invisible hand was flipping through them. The months passed quickly, one after another, until they stopped on a date that burned in my heart. September. The year wasn't written, but inside me I knew it was the time that was coming, the time toward which everything was running. I felt the same urgency that a traveler feels when he realizes that the train is about to leave, and he can no longer postpone the race to the station. September was not just a month, it was a threshold. Jesus didn't explain everything to me, but inside me I perceived that in that period something huge would begin to manifest itself. Not the end of the world, but the beginning of a countdown that no one could stop. The images became more intense. I saw agitated seas, waves that went over the coasts and swallowed cities built too close to the water. I saw lands split as if the heart of the planet were rebelling. But most of all, I saw the confusion of souls. Men who shouted, "Peace! Security!" and meanwhile sowed war. Religious people who preached in crowded churches but with empty hearts, unable to offer the truth. Some of them wore luxurious robes, but from their mouths came words that did not bring life, only illusion. Jesus made me understand that even within the church there would be deep divisions, scandals that would make many waver. But at the same time, I saw small, hidden groups that gathered in homes, in the countryside, in modern catacombs. They prayed, sang, and supported each other. They were the seeds of a new revival. Jesus then made me understand with a clarity that cut to the soul. In September, it will happen. That month will be like a threshold, a door that opens, and those who are ready will enter with him into glory. But those who do not ascend will remain on earth and will have to go through 7 years that will not simply be difficult, but a true living purgatory. I saw men and women wandering like shadows, with no more certainties, with their idols shattered and their certainties reduced to dust. The rich found themselves poor in an instant. Cities collapsed under the weight of natural disasters and wars that flared up suddenly. Markets fell, money became useless paper, and people scrambled for a piece of bread. Every day was a trial, every night a lament. It was not hell, but neither was it peace. It was the time of forced purification, the time when souls would have to choose whether to finally cry out to God or sink into despair. Jesus showed me that many would weep not only from hunger and violence, but from understanding too late that salvation had been offered and rejected. Then the vision returned to me as if a circle had closed. I found myself again in that suspended silence, with my heart beating fast. I realized that I was no longer a spectator, but part of the scene. Everything I had seen was not just a message for the world, but a task for me. I had to go back. I had to speak. It didn't matter if they believed me or mocked me. It didn't matter if they called me crazy or a visionary. The truth did not belong to me, yet it had been entrusted to my lips. A sudden pain went through me as if my earthly body were claiming me back. It was a violent pang, and with it a sensation of crashing, like falling from an infinite height. I saw a glare in front of me, no longer the gentle face of Jesus, but a light that was sucking me back. And in that instant, his voice resonated again, clear, definitive. Go and tell them that time is getting short. Go and remind everyone that I am coming soon. Do not fear. I will be with you. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body. The sounds of the room hit me like waves, excited voices, someone crying, the accelerated beeping of a medical machine. I had returned. Tears streamed down my face, not from physical pain, but from the unwavering certainty that I had seen the truth. And as I tried to move my lips, the only phrase that managed to come out was the one that burned inside me like a fire. Time is getting short. Jesus is coming soon. I can't explain how it happened. One instant before I was still immersed in that light that seemed to breathe with me, and an instant later I felt the weight of my body pour onto the hospital bed. It was like falling into a shell that I knew, but that had become a stranger to me, heavy, tired, fragile. I opened my eyes and saw the doctors and nurses moving around me like confused figures, while the machines emitted sharp, rapid sounds. I didn't understand if I was returning to life or if I was entering another phase of death. But in my chest, like a fire that doesn't go out, the echo of Jesus' words continued to vibrate. I remember my first breath was like swallowing fire and water together. I coughed, gasping for air, and as the room took shape in front of me, a single awareness grabbed hold of me. I hadn't returned by chance. That return was not the result of medicine or luck. I had been sent back. I had been chosen for a task that I still didn't fully understand, but that I knew would mark the rest of my days. Jesus had touched me, and that touch had remained etched in me like an invisible brand. It wasn't just a memory. It was a force that burned inside, that kept me awake even when my body collapsed from exhaustion. The words he had given me resonated nonstop. Announce what you have seen. Do not fear derision or hostility, because what I have shown you does not belong to you, but to the time that is coming. In the first hours after waking up, I couldn't speak. My voice was a broken thread, but in my mind the images flowed like a rushing river. Cities swallowed by water, skies torn by cosmic fires, humanity's blind race toward an economic and spiritual precipice. Every scene was alive, not like a dream that dissolves, but like an imminent reality that was pressing at the gates. I realized something that made me tremble. Those visions were not just symbols. They were concrete possibilities, paths already laid out. Humanity was at a crossroads, and September will not just be a month like any other, but a sign sculpted in the sky, an appointment set in history. I was not given to know exactly what would happen, but I had seen enough to understand that that date would be a turning point. And so I began to bear witness, not with high-sounding speeches, not with studied words, but simply by telling what had happened to me. The first times I felt like I was stammering, that I didn't have the right language to describe the indescribable, yet those who listened to me remained silent, struck not by my sentences, but by the truth that seeped through them. Some cried, others got angry, still others looked at me with suspicion, as you look at a man who has lost his mind. But I knew it wasn't madness. It was a mandate. I know that my testimony will not change the entire world, but if even a single soul prepares, if even one heart is converted, then my return will have had meaning. Jesus showed me that the future is not a blind destiny, but a ground that is prepared today, with daily choices, with love or with indifference. And he made me understand that each of us is a lamp called to shine precisely when the darkness thickens. Today, I live with only one certainty. I no longer belong to myself. My life has been returned for a short and precious time, a time that must be spent as an offering. I don't know when the Lord will call me again, but I know that until then, I will speak. I will speak of the fire I saw, of the mercy I felt, of the impending deadline, of the revival that can still save us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying us to the end of this testimony. The fact that you are still here means that something has spoken to your spirit in a special way. For this reason, we ask you for a simple but meaningful gesture. Write in the comments from which place you are following us so we can unite in prayer for your land and for your people. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. It is a small gesture that will allow you not to miss any of the revelations and messages that we share every day with faith and with love. And finally, the most important step, share this video with at least 3 people you care about. Friends, relatives, brothers, and sisters in faith. A simple click can truly open a soul's eyes, rekindle hope, and bring a lost heart back into God's arms. May the Lord protect you, guide you, and accompany you in truth and light, today and always.